Most nuclear facility guards wouldn't have noticed the coordinated theft attempt, targeting weapons-grade nuclear material. But David Chen identified the nuclear material trafficking indicators, radiation detection evasion methods, and weapons proliferation patterns that revealed he wasn't just facility security, he was a former Department of Energy nuclear security specialist whose counterproliferation work had prevented nuclear material from reaching terrorist organizations worldwide. David Chen had been working as head of security at the Riverside Nuclear Power Station for 6 years, and in that time, he'd become an integral part of the facility's multi-layered defense systems that protected one of America's most sensitive energy infrastructure assets. The nuclear plant generated electricity for over 2 million homes while maintaining weapons-grade nuclear materials that required the highest levels of federal security oversight and protection protocols. At 45, David carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who understood that nuclear facility security involved both national energy infrastructure protection and weapons proliferation prevention responsibilities. He was built like someone who maintained peak physical condition for demanding security environments, but his approach to nuclear security emphasized technical expertise and threat analysis rather than just physical deterrence. Federal regulators respected his comprehensive understanding of nuclear security protocols, and plant management trusted his judgment about complex security situations involving classified materials. The nuclear facility itself was a fortress of advanced security technology, multiple security perimeters with armed response teams, sophisticated radiation detection systems, and federal oversight protocols that governed every aspect of nuclear material handling and storage. The plant operated under Nuclear Regulatory Commission oversight, with Department of Energy security requirements that made it one of the most heavily protected civilian facilities in the country. What made David different from typical nuclear facility security chiefs was his ability to recognize patterns in criminal behavior that indicated sophisticated threats to nuclear materials rather than conventional industrial security concerns. While other nuclear security focused on access control and routine safety protocols, David found himself automatically analyzing nuclear material vulnerabilities, assessing proliferation risks, and recognizing the warning signs that preceded attempts to acquire nuclear materials for weapons development. His colleagues often remarked on his unusual technical knowledge of nuclear security, the way he understood radioactive material handling, nuclear weapons proliferation methods, and the complex federal regulations that governed nuclear material protection. They attributed it to exceptional professional training and natural technical aptitude, never suspecting that his expertise came from years of investigating how terrorist organizations and hostile nations attempted to acquire nuclear materials for weapons programs. The facility housed several types of nuclear materials, including enriched uranium and plutonium isotopes, that could be used for weapons development if acquired by terrorist organizations or hostile foreign governments. It was exactly the kind of target that appealed to international criminal networks seeking to sell nuclear materials to the highest bidders, regardless of their intentions. The coordinated theft attempt began at 2:30 a.m. during a shift change when security coverage was briefly reduced for routine personnel rotation. A team of 5 individuals with sophisticated technical knowledge attempted to breach the facility's nuclear material storage areas using equipment and methods that indicated extensive intelligence gathering and professional criminal expertise. David's Department of Energy nuclear security training activated immediately, while other security personnel followed standard intrusion response protocols. David was analyzing the attack from the perspective of someone who understood how nuclear material trafficking operations were planned and executed by international criminal organizations seeking to acquire weapons-grade materials. The attack wasn't random industrial theft. It demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of nuclear facility operations, radioactive material handling procedures, and the specific security vulnerabilities that could be exploited to acquire weapons-grade nuclear materials. The intruders had detailed technical knowledge of radiation detection systems, nuclear material storage protocols, and facility security procedures that suggested extensive planning and possible insider intelligence. David realized that this wasn't just nuclear facility intrusion. It was a nuclear proliferation operation designed to acquire materials that could be used for weapons development by terrorist organizations or hostile foreign governments. His Department of Energy experience had taught him to recognize the difference between industrial espionage and genuine threats to nuclear weapons non-proliferation. The intruders' technical approach confirmed David's assessment. They were using radiation detection evasion techniques, nuclear material handling equipment, and security bypass methods that exceeded typical criminal capabilities. This was organized nuclear proliferation targeting American nuclear materials, requiring federal counterproliferation response and the kind of nuclear security expertise that only Department of Energy specialists possessed. While facility security protocols called for lockdown procedures and federal notification, David's counterproliferation background told him that preventing nuclear material acquisition required understanding the criminals' technical capabilities and operational methods to ensure they couldn't successfully acquire weapons-grade materials during the security response. David's Department of Energy nuclear security expertise allowed him to make tactical decisions that other nuclear facility security couldn't. He understood nuclear material trafficking methodologies, weapons proliferation techniques, and the international networks that converted stolen nuclear materials into weapons development programs. His first priority was preventing the theft team from acquiring any weapons-grade nuclear materials that could be used for weapons development by terrorist organizations or hostile nations. David's experience with counterproliferation investigations had taught him that nuclear material trafficking operations often targeted civilian nuclear facilities, specifically because weapons-grade materials were more accessible than military nuclear weapons facilities. Using his knowledge of nuclear security protocols combined with Department of Energy training, David began implementing counterproliferation procedures that could protect nuclear materials while coordinating with federal agencies that had jurisdiction over nuclear weapons proliferation threats, but needed specialized technical expertise for effective response. David's communication with federal nuclear security authorities demonstrated expertise that exceeded normal facility security training. He was providing technical analysis of nuclear material trafficking methods, proliferation threat assessment, and counter-proliferation intelligence that helped federal agents understand the international implications of the theft attempt. The most critical insight was David's recognition that the theft team's technical capabilities indicated connections to international nuclear proliferation networks that posed threats beyond simple material theft. The sophisticated radiation detection evasion methods, nuclear material handling expertise, and security bypass techniques all suggested criminal organization with access to nuclear weapons development knowledge. His approach to the crisis demonstrated the kind of technical precision that characterized Department of Energy counterproliferation operations. David understood nuclear material security, proliferation threat analysis, and the specialized techniques required for protecting weapons-grade materials from acquisition by hostile organizations seeking nuclear weapons capabilities. When federal nuclear security response teams arrived, they found David had already secured all nuclear materials, provided technical intelligence about the theft team's capabilities and likely objectives, and implemented protective protocols that had prevented any weapons-grade materials from being compromised while preserving operational intelligence about international nuclear trafficking networks. Security Chief Chen, your nuclear counterproliferation response exceeded anything we'd expect from civilian facility security, said Department of Energy Nuclear Security Coordinator Dr. Sarah Martinez as federal investigators secured the theft team. Your understanding of nuclear material trafficking and weapons proliferation methods suggests serious federal nuclear security training. How did you identify proliferation threats with that level of expertise? David's response stunned everyone present. I spent 12 years as a Department of Energy nuclear security specialist conducting counter-proliferation investigations and nuclear material protection operations worldwide. When I left federal service, I wanted to continue protecting nuclear materials from weapons proliferation, but I never expected to encounter international nuclear trafficking operations targeting civilian nuclear facilities. The investigation revealed that David's technical analysis had been completely accurate. The theft team was part of an international nuclear proliferation network that had been systematically targeting American nuclear facilities to acquire weapons-grade materials for sale to terrorist organizations and hostile foreign governments seeking nuclear weapons capabilities. Nuclear plant director Dr. James Thompson realized he had been employing a former Department of Energy nuclear security specialist as routine facility security. "David, you're not just nuclear plant security. You're a federal counterproliferation expert whose training just prevented weapons-grade nuclear materials from reaching international terrorism networks." DUA coordinator Martinez was particularly impressed by David's ability to recognize nuclear proliferation threats disguised as industrial theft. "The counterproliferation intelligence you provided about nuclear material trafficking methods and international proliferation networks allowed us to understand threats that exceeded conventional facility security assessment capabilities." What amazed federal investigators was David's nuclear security judgment under extreme pressure. His decision to treat the intrusion as a nuclear proliferation threat rather than routine industrial theft had enabled appropriate federal counterproliferation response while protecting weapons-grade materials from acquisition by international criminal organizations. News of the incident spread throughout federal nuclear security and international counterproliferation communities within hours. David's successful application of Department of Energy nuclear security expertise to civilian facility protection demonstrated how specialized counterproliferation training could be essential for protecting American nuclear materials from sophisticated international threats. The story resonated particularly strongly with other Department of Energy veterans working in civilian nuclear roles, showing that their specialized training provided capabilities that could be crucial for protecting nuclear facilities from threats that exceeded conventional security planning. Many federal nuclear specialists had felt their expertise wasn't relevant to civilian nuclear facility work, but David's example proved otherwise. Department of Energy nuclear security investigators conducted extensive analysis of the incident, recognizing that civilian nuclear facilities faced evolving threats from international nuclear proliferation networks seeking to acquire weapons-grade materials for terrorist organizations and hostile foreign governments. They wanted to understand how David's counterproliferation background had enabled such effective threat recognition and whether his methods could be adapted for other nuclear facilities requiring enhanced security against proliferation threats. David worked closely with Department of Energy nuclear security specialists, FBI counterproliferation investigators, and Nuclear Regulatory Commission security coordinators to develop enhanced nuclear material protection protocols that incorporated counterproliferation intelligence while maintaining the operational efficiency that civilian nuclear facilities required for energy production. The incident had profound effects on how civilian nuclear facilities approached security planning. David's analysis had revealed threat indicators that conventional nuclear security assessments had missed, demonstrating that sophisticated international proliferation threats required specialized counterproliferation knowledge to identify and counter effectively. More importantly, David's approach had demonstrated that Department of Energy nuclear security expertise could be successfully integrated into civilian nuclear facility operations without creating excessive restrictions that interfered with electricity generation and legitimate nuclear energy operations. David decided to remain with the nuclear facility, but with expanded responsibilities that utilized his unique federal qualifications. The nuclear energy industry hired him as Director of Nuclear Counterproliferation Security, responsible for developing nuclear material protection protocols for civilian nuclear facilities nationwide. Federal nuclear security authorities maintained David as a consultant for cases involving potential nuclear proliferation threats against American nuclear facilities, but his primary focus remained on ensuring that civilian nuclear energy could continue providing clean electricity without nuclear materials becoming vulnerable to acquisition by terrorist organizations or hostile foreign governments. Veterans organizations highlighted David's story as an example of how specialized Department of Energy training could be successfully applied to civilian roles that served nuclear security while providing meaningful employment for counterproliferation specialists transitioning from federal nuclear service. 2 years later, David had revolutionized nuclear security operations for civilian nuclear facilities requiring sophisticated counterproliferation protection. His protocols for nuclear material threat assessment, proliferation network analysis, and federal coordination had prevented numerous potential incidents while maintaining the operational efficiency that civilian nuclear facilities required for reliable electricity generation. More importantly, David had demonstrated that Department of Energy nuclear security expertise could enhance civilian nuclear facility protection without creating fortress-like restrictions that interfered with legitimate nuclear energy operations. His approach combined counterproliferation competence with genuine understanding of civilian nuclear energy requirements and the operational principles that made nuclear power plants viable for clean electricity generation. The nuclear facility itself had become a model for nuclear security that protected weapons-grade materials from international proliferation threats, while preserving the operational flexibility that civilian nuclear energy required. Federal nuclear security agencies and civilian nuclear operators studied David's methods for protecting nuclear facilities from sophisticated international threats. Detective Maria Santos, who had coordinated with David during the nuclear proliferation investigation, often brought new nuclear security personnel to observe his counterproliferation operations. "This is what professional nuclear facility security looks like," she would tell them. Not just access control and routine safety protocols, but understanding nuclear proliferation threats well enough to prevent weapons-grade materials from reaching terrorist organizations that could use them against American cities. David Chen continues his nuclear security work at civilian nuclear facilities, but everyone in the nuclear energy industry now understands that their Director of Nuclear Counterproliferation Security brings something extraordinary to his role. He's the former Department of Energy nuclear security specialist who chose civilian nuclear facility protection over federal nuclear weapons facility assignments, who understands that protecting nuclear materials from proliferation is just as important as investigating nuclear trafficking from government offices. His story reminds us that Department of Energy expertise developed protecting America's nuclear security doesn't end when specialists leave federal service. It continues in new forms of nuclear protection that may be less visible, but are equally essential to preventing nuclear materials from reaching terrorist organizations that could use them to threaten American cities and international security. Sometimes the person protecting civilian nuclear facilities carries training from the Department of Energy's most specialized counterproliferation units, quietly preventing nuclear material theft with skills developed investigating international nuclear trafficking networks. These are the professionals who understand that nuclear security requires both technical expertise and deep knowledge of how international criminal organizations seek to acquire nuclear materials for weapons development. David's choice to remain in civilian nuclear facility security rather than pursue high-profile federal nuclear weapons facility assignments represents something fundamental about nuclear security: that protecting nuclear materials doesn't require classified weapons facilities or top-secret clearances. Sometimes the most valuable nuclear security happens at civilian nuclear power plants, provided by professionals whose expertise ensures that nuclear materials remain secure from international proliferation networks seeking to acquire weapons-grade materials for terrorist organizations. The next time you see a nuclear power plant and think about the clean electricity it generates, remember David's story. The security personnel protecting those facilities might just be former Department of Energy counterproliferation specialists whose background in nuclear security continues to serve and protect American communities from the threat of nuclear terrorism, one nuclear facility at a time.